I mobilized with the National Guard Infantry and went to Iraq, and I worked as a civilian in Afghanistan, so it's a little bit of a breakup story there, but a State Department program to build facilities in Africa for anti-terrorist training. We built two one in Djibouti, one in Uganda. The cost of them was about $500,000 each. So we'd send a crew in and they'd build these structures that the local forces could work on.
And if we were a little bit more like that on the business side of things, I think things would be a whole lot smoother and easier.
Well, I think selection is really a key factor in success, but the principles don't change. What people don't understand is you still have to have honesty, you still have to have integrity, you still have to have all those things that guide you through whatever the process is of leadership at the survey level or at the, taking down a terrorist target. These are ruthless people and they will do whatever they want. There's actually an article out about the leadership in Qatar saying, hey, we don't care what happens to the Palestinians. We're just trying to start a fight with the Israelis. The Ranger Regiment doesn't have the same kind of selection process that Delta Force has.
What is it that you feel like sets the people that actually made it from the ones who would tell you that they would die to get there, but they're not successful? I mean, any thoughts there?
One of the big problems is people get injured. In very good shape is essential, but also being able to identify risky terrain features and avoid them. You should work to the point where you're capable of doing whatever level of work you're doing. So if something does occur, you don't miss it just because you're not capable.
All of that to say, I think we're lying if we say there's not some bit of luck involved or some bit of circumstance involved.
People need to understand that failure is part of all these things.
On this episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with Tom Bigley. Tom spent 28 years in the military, Army Ranger, and then Delta Force. Tom has an unbelievable track record as a leader and shares his thoughts on what makes a great leader, what sets him apart from the rest, including teamwork, selecting talent for your team. Tom also shares his thoughts on the current situation in the Middle East. I really think that you're going to enjoy everything that Tom has to say, so stick around. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter & Clark. I would love to just start just a couple of minutes on your background, a little bit of you can just touch a little bit on the military and the fact that you were in the unit, just so our audience knows, who we're talking with, and then would love to talk about your transition into civilian life, and then a little bit about Trisec USA, for whatever you're comfortable or willing to share there. And then, I just have a bunch of questions. It always fascinates me, just your thoughts, just leadership lessons, life advice, having experienced all that you have with your 28 years in the military and your as a business owner with Trisec and everything. So is that an okay sort of outline for where we go?
Absolutely. Sure.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you for inviting me on, first of all.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate the interest in, some of my history, but I know we connected through Jess Larson. So
yes,
thank him. And, I've worked with him for quite a while now. I think at least 15 or plus years I've worked on different things. Yeah. And I met him through an Army friend, but I like to emphasize, and I've done a lot of things in special operations, but, without the Ranger Battalion in Fort Lewis, the 2nd Ranger Battalion specifically, the leadership lessons that I learned there initially were so critical, in the mentorships from several different people. But as a matter of fact, Scott Miller was one of the lieutenants in Alpha Company, and that's for your audience, that's 4-star General Scott Miller, who was the commander of all the Afghan forces, that theater.
Yeah, wow.
And people like that. And he's one of actually many people that rose to quite a high rank on the enlisted side and or officer side. But the lessons that I learned early on in my career, and now I owned a company before I joined the Army. So I owned a construction company when I was 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
I was in college and I got tired of being broke all the time, and friends of mine had businesses, and I partnered with one of my high school buddies and started a Fairfield County construction company, which still exists in Southern Connecticut.
Holy cow.
And then a friend of mine was in the Ranger Battalion, and I was interested in moving to the West Coast, and I thought that was a good vehicle for doing that. And so I did. I joined the Army to start actually a company out in Washington State after like 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then I really liked what I was doing, so I stayed in.
Okay.
So I spent about 6 years in the Ranger Regiment in Washington State, and then I transitioned to a staff role in the USASOC Command headquarters, or actually the Special Forces Command headquarters in North Carolina. At the time, Fort Bragg. I think it's Camp Victory now or something. But
is that right?
I think they changed the name, because Bragg was a Confederate general and he was a heathen, I'm sure. So, yeah.
I got you.
But everybody that I know still considers it Fort Bragg. So I went there for a year as a staff member and ran. I had the opportunity to work with the guy named Chuck Briscoe, who was the USASOC historian after he retired, was a Delta Force staff member and so forth. Really great guy, probably the most influential person in my career. And from there, I went to selection, and I was in A Squadron Delta Force for about 7 years till 97. And I got out to be in the reserves, and I ended up joining the Washington State Special Forces National Guard. And then 9/11 occurred, and a lot of things changed at that point. I ran the airport security program in Washington State when they had the military guys in Washington airports. And according to the head of the National Guard Bureau, it was the best program they'd seen in the country. So
really,
we did a lot of work with training and bringing people up to speed with weapons training and so forth. And then a continuous training program for the year. And then I mobilized with the National Guard Infantry and went to Iraq, and I worked as a civilian in Afghanistan. So it's a little bit of a breakup story there, but I ended up doing 2 tours in Iraq with the Washington National Guard and retired in 2010.
Okay.
Now, I had run a couple of, as I was still in the National Guard, I opened the company Trisec Services to do government contracts.
Okay.
And it wasn't a conflict of interest because we weren't doing Army contracts and so forth. And that transferred into some State Department work with a State Department program to build facilities in Africa for anti-terrorist training. And we built two in one in Djibouti, one in Uganda, and where was the other one? There was 3 of them, but my wife actually secured the 3rd one.
Really?
And yes, did a great job. She and these were about the cost of them was about $500,000 each. So we'd send a crew in, and they'd build these structures that the local forces could work on. And we did that with Trisec for about 4 or 5 years through the process. And we did some other contracts here and there for other things. Those were the major contracts. And I did a couple more things for the State Department, but essentially in 2017, I retired.
Okay.
So, and I've consulted with different people, and I've done some different work here and there, but a very selective basis since then.
Okay. I got you. Well, so what year, so you said you were 20 and you were in college when you enlisted, is that right?
Well, I had just gotten out of school, and I was 23. So I'd gotten out of school when I was about 21. So I worked my construction company for about a year. and then I joined the Army.
Okay.
It was a strange transition.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that, but just generally speaking, from that point until when you retired, so it was almost 30 years, right, that you were in?
Oh, yeah. It was 28 plus. And like I said, so when I was in the reserves, before I got mobilized, I worked for other agencies, we'll say, on some trips in Afghanistan and some other side work that was interesting because of the war situation that was going on with Afghanistan and Iraq. So
and we won't get into that. I won't won't push. We'll leave that to the side. But I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned a couple of really impactful leaders there when you were Second Ranger Battalion. You mentioned Scott Miller. What he obviously made a big impression on you. What was it about? Was he a captain at the time, did you say?
He was actually a first lieutenant. He was a platoon leader.
Oh, wow.
In the same company I was in. And he was an influence on me to a certain degree, but I think it was more of a group of people like him. A guy named Paul Zastrow was another lieutenant. And notable people like Pete Blaber wrote Mission Men and Me.
The Mission of the Men and Me, yeah.
He was a lieutenant there at the same time. So this group of people, and a bunch of the enlisted guys, Harold Roberts was my platoon sergeant, and Leon Guerrero was the sergeant major for 2nd Ranger Battalion at the time. Okay. These guys, they really were similar to in a junior way, but similar to the unit in the sense that they wanted you to, think on your feet and be able to be independent and do the right thing for the job. We were a simple example of that was we were getting ready to do an airfield seizure, and we had some new officer show up, and I don't remember the fella's name, but the jump clearing team was set up to do a jump clearing mission. And then they had the Jeep drivers and different people. So everybody was in a different uniform. And this guy was all upset about that. And he didn't understand what we were doing. And he was a major, I think. And he was kind of, counseling us on we weren't very uniform and so forth. And one of the E7s was like, look, sir, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to just step over there and just watch what we do. And then after the fact, if you have something to say about it. And then the battalion commander showed up and was like, hey, you need to leave these guys alone. And they know what they're doing. So it was comical in the sense that he didn't really understand what we were doing. Because the jump guys were going to jump out of airplanes. The other guys had armored vests on and so forth. So it was a completely different look.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like Pete Blaber's common sense leadership. So I followed Pete Blaber pretty closely and read his books, and, including his time as AFO commander, and just I admire him greatly for his outlook. And he's also done he's done some recent work on the Pat Tillman. He just released a new book on the Pat Tillman situation and uncovered a bunch of, he's just done a lot of great stuff for the folks that went through that, for the gentlemen that were serving to help them. But so it sounds like that was sort of an all-star cast that you were exposed to early on.
I worked with, I forgot, but I worked with Stan McChrystal as a staff guy. I worked with him when he was in JSOC as a staff officer. I worked directly with him on a couple different projects. And I didn't know him as a commander and as a general officer, but I mean, a very level-headed guy, a really good, no-nonsense person that just wanted results. He wasn't worried about any of the flashy stuff. He just said, hey, we need to make this happen, and here's how we're going to do it. And so I got a lot out of him, too. I don't know. I know the situation with Pat Tillman, of course, but Pete was my troop commander at Delta also. So I knew him in the Ranger Regiment and was
Oh, wow.
directly involved with him in A Squadron.
Oh,
So
wow.
we had a very good relationship, and I haven't talked to him in quite a while, but I know him very well, and I think he's I know that he will just do the right thing. There's no question that he doesn't care who's telling him to do what.
Yeah.
He's going to do what's right, and that's what they're looking for, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Even
Well,
corporately, I think is what you want.
look, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. So we didn't. This podcast is not at all about me, and so we don't want to spend any time on that. But I'm CEO for a national property survey firm. We do property surveys in 14 states across the country, and so we've got a bunch of employees and things, and I am constantly amazed and sort of at awe in the leadership principles that are taught from the lowest levels in the military and all the way through, and how there's different paradigms and they're taught a little bit differently, but how much they mirror the leadership lessons in corporate America, but more so how the great leaders react and handle sort of those situations on the margin, right? That maybe not be very real simple scenarios or situations, but that I've just found that the great military leaders, there's a lot to be learned from as a business executive in terms of the decisions that they've made, and the way that they have presented themselves in tough situations. It just provided a great microcosm, I think, for how, and if we were a little bit more like that on the business side of things, I think things would be a whole lot smoother and easier. None of the, there's just so much BS that sort of gets in the way of things. And I hate to put it like that, but.
Well, I think selection is really a key factor in success. The Ranger Battalion has a selection process. It has changed somewhat over the years. However, I still think it's relatively sound. And I know that the unit, the Delta operators, have a selection process that's extremely sound. And the point of that is that they know, for example, when I was there, I was an operator and I was also a sniper, and I did some different things with explosives. And I was very well versed with some civilian explosive experts, and I dealt with those guys regularly. And the command understood that I was capable of doing that. They wouldn't put somebody in that situation. If they were a good shooter, they may put them in one situation, but they understood people's limitations and also their potential.
Okay.
So I don't think you can fake that. And I think corporate America right now, and politically, of course, and a lot of things are being faked that, we want to wish people can do certain things when it's really just performance based. If
Right.
they've displayed that, absolutely. I don't care who they are. If they can do whatever you're tasking them to do with, minimal leadership or minimal guidance or whatever you want to call it, and they may be able to go to the next level. I have a very good friend of mine that has worked with me for 20 plus years now, 23 or 24 years. He's a very good, he's not a Delta Force guy. He's a regular Army guy, but he has worked at all kinds of levels in private security and in corporate security and executive security. And he's one of the best guys I've ever seen do this, but he's not the guy to run the company. He's the guy to run the detail. And I've told him this right to his face. I'm like, you're not the guy to run the operation here. You're just the guy to run the ground to the actual security side. And there's nobody better. And he understands that there are limitations on levels of things that he can do. But when you put somebody that's substandard in a role, if they fail, then all the people that they're trying to train are going to fail too. Or they're going to see a poor example of things. They're going to maybe get a bad taste in their mouth about the company policies. So I've had up to 1,500 people working for me in different situations on military contracts or I ran Falcon Security in Iraq for a couple of years.
Okay.
And it was very important to make sure I hired the right people blindly based on what it looked like they could do. And then a performance test, you have sometime, in this case, we had about a 30 to 60 day trial period. If I didn't like what they were doing, we fixed it immediately. Either fixed them or moved them out.
Right.
It wasn't a question. And even though the jobs that I was doing, a lot of people say there's a difference between jobs where people's lives are actively on the line. And then, I don't know that much about property, whatever you said your property assessments
Survey.
were.
Yeah.
But
sure.
Thinking that the surveys probably aren't that life-threatening.
Exactly.
In the sense that you don't expect, if you send some guys out to do a survey, they're not going to survive. In some of the things I did, you had to make that assumption that, hey, these guys could have an issue where they may not survive. So that's a little bit different, obviously. But the principles don't change. What people don't understand is you still have to have honesty. You still have to have integrity. You still have to have all those things that guide you through whatever the process is of leadership at the survey level or at the taking down a terrorist target.
Absolutely.
I think we're seeing that in Israel right now, and people don't like it. But you're absolutely seeing the Israeli leadership say, hey, enough is enough with this, and there's only one way to fix it. And they're going to do whatever they think is right here. Now, you can disagree with them politically. You can disagree with them on Palestine occupation and all this baloney. But at this point, they made a decision, and they're going to follow their decision to the end.
Right.
And
right.
I think they're right. I mean, I've dealt with terrorists all over the world. They're very similar. These are ruthless people, and they will do whatever they want. There's actually an article out about the leadership in Qatar saying, hey, we don't care what happens to the Palestinians. We're just trying to start a fight with the Israelis.
Really?
And yeah, if you can look that up. There's an article about the Hamas leadership, which why they're allowing them to sit in Qatar. They've extorted several, I think between about $5 and $10 billion from their people. And, it's just, but those kinds of things. So leadership matters.
Agreed.
It matters at all levels. At kindergarten level, the kindergarten teacher has to have some leadership ability. And so does the president of the United States. Maybe he needs to be more well-rounded, but the principles don't change.
Gosh, I could not agree more, and I wish we could shout that from the rooftops of everywhere across the world. I think I agree 1,000% with what you said. Even when the outcomes aren't as perilous as life or death, whether it's just a survey crew, human beings respond to the same types of incentives and are guided by good leaders and bad leaders regardless. But you started that with what I thought was another excellent point, and you said that it really starts with the selection process. So, identifying and understanding talent, right? Is that what you? I think that's what you meant by that.
Well, there's different ways you can get to the same conclusion. The Ranger Regiment doesn't have the same kind of selection process that Delta Force has. Granted, I'm not there right now. I'm talking in historically speaking.
Sure.
I know that the Ranger Regiment tries to emulate a lot of things that Delta does, but the bottom line is it's sort of like junior high school and college level things.
Gotcha. So what is it? RIP? Is it RIP? Is it RIP? Is the Ranger
indoctrination program is one place where they start the selection process, and you have to accomplish certain things. And they do similar physical things with the unit. I'd say the key difference to me was, and again, I'm not saying selection in 2023, I really don't know.
Right. When you were there.
When I was there, it was an absolute individual process during selection in Delta, where it was a little bit more of a team effort with the Ranger Regiment.
Gotcha.
I think that's the key difference. And I think that's important at a really junior level to be able to have that a little bit of backup by a team level. And once you get to the NFL level, you need to be able to do these things on your own. So I think that was a key positive factor for me. Now, I know most of the unit people are from some special operations background, but not all of them.
Right.
I think that most of the guys have a similar bring up in special forces, although I'm not special forces qualified. It's a similar process for them, and then they can transition into a higher level. It's hard to explain the difference between like people at Delta Force level and what they're capable of doing and everybody else. But it's a dramatic difference. It really is a high level. It's hard to say. It doesn't even equate to say college football in the NFL. There's very few Delta operators that have ever existed. And there's a lot of people in the Army that have tried to do that.
Right.
So I think it's a much bigger difference. And to rib my friends at SEAL Team 6, it's different from them too. But they do an excellent job. I won't say that they're any different, but I do think that Delta does stand apart in certain areas. So I think you can still look at those principles and apply them to work.
Right. Right.
Whatever work that is, whether you're trying to start a company, whether you're trying to deliver newspapers, I think you can apply things that are learned at those levels at management styles that would help a lot of corporate America.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of different people and I've trained, I train people in shooting sometimes very selectively. But one of the guys that I've worked with owns a large company in Seattle. And he was like the leadership principles of the shooting stuff was applicable to his, he was making similarities like, hey, this is great because you're telling me exactly what you want me to do. Then you're expecting me to perform. If I don't, you're correcting things. He goes, we have to do the exact same things and his company installs high-rise sprinkler systems in large, multi-story buildings.
Right.
He goes, it's really the same. You have to take somebody that's new, that hasn't done this work, kind of treat them in the basic level, and then bring them on through to more advanced things. Yeah. And if they can do it, they get to advance.
Right. And thrive.
Unfortunately,
right.
I think a lot of people are being advanced for other reasons.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. Things that the externalities tell them are important, but may not necessarily apply whatsoever at all to whether or not they are a good fit for the job or can do the job. You mentioned trying to explain the difference or explain how to compare sort of a Delta operator to everybody else. And look, I was never in Delta Force, so this is a lay opinion. But the way I sort of think about it is you've got the Delta Force is that very few people on the planet Earth where you sort of marry up, the whole, 10,000 hours of practice thing, where you've got the Tiger Woods, that they, or Steve Jobs with computers. Once you're able to have 10,000 hours of something, then you're sort of an expert. And then you marry that with the very few people on the planet that are the absolute best at whatever their particular job or role is, whether they're a sniper or breacher, what have you. And then you've got, that unusual combination makes those very select few. That's just my personal opinion. That could be the silliest thing anybody has ever heard. But what I do know that there are a lot of people that want to do that and that try to do that and do not succeed. I don't want to say fail. They don't succeed. I'm curious, for whether it's somebody that's a budding entrepreneur or is about to start school or is going into the military, or maybe they're in the military now, they're about to go to selection. What is it that you feel like sets the people that actually made it from the ones who would tell you that they would die to get there, but they're not successful? I mean, any thoughts there?
Oh, sure. One of the big issues, it's the selection process in the selection part of it is very physical, in the sense of, walking through mountains, up and down hills, and navigating rough terrain. One of the big problems is people get injured. They fall down, they break an ankle, or they twist their ankle bad enough. So you really got to be able to walk on a variety of terrain well. And that's another great thing in the Ranger Battalion. They put 70, 80 pounds of crap on your back and make you walk through the forests of Fort Lewis. I did that for 6 years. I got pretty good at it. And that, of course, that helped dramatically. So I think being in very good shape is essential, but also being able to identify risky terrain features and avoid them. And I know a lot of good friends of mine that were just as capable as I was, and went to selection and failed because they got injured. So that was a big problem. So if you can avoid injury and you can maintain a decent pace, you're probably going to do okay. You really have to know how to navigate pretty well. So if your navigation skills aren't great, you need to work on that. And as a basic navigation skill with a map and compass, not with some kind of fancy modern doodad like your phone or whatever. Right. So that would be, and again, I went through selection in 1991. So what's going on up there now, I couldn't tell you.
Sure.
But I'm sure it's pretty similar in the sense that you've got to go from point A to point B in a certain amount of time with all the right stuff in whatever conditions are occurring, rain, snow, sleet, sunshine, heat, whatever. And you still got to make the time.
Yeah.
So I think there is some sense of there's people that are capable and they just didn't get there for a certain reason, whether it was because they got injured or whatever, or they made a stupid mistake. I'm not sure. I know that they let you come back. I know people that have gone through selection back in the old days four times and finally passed. I don't believe they allow that anymore.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. But either way, there are people that are very capable people just because they didn't pass this test. They were very successful in other things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's really interesting. And I think there's a lot there. I don't know how much avoiding injury is a skill in that environment, or how much of it is, I don't want to say luck, but maybe circumstance, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, in talking to somebody that wants to be a young guy or a gal that wants to be a CEO, or a young person that wants to be in Delta Force, I do think we are fooling or not telling the truth if we don't at least admit that there is some bit of luck involved, right? There's some bit of circumstance involved. You've got to be in the right place at the right time in order to get to, your journey will be a product of being in the right place at the right time. And you might have to try several times, but don't maybe underestimate that, I think, is what I've heard you say. Is that fair?
Yeah, and kind of echoing, I did a podcast with Jess Larson with a high school friend of mine, Tom Gorman, and he was the former CEO of Ford Australia, and then also a large, I think they were based in Australia, a very large logistics company.
Okay.
And he made the point, he said, a lot of people asked him, once he was successful with like young executives, like, I want to be a CEO. He said, some of that boils down to being in the right place at the right time. So it's not always about your ability. You could be the most capable person. If it doesn't come up and they're not in need of that slot being filled, you may get just passed over by chance.
Exactly.
He said, but you should work to the point where you're capable of doing whatever level of work you're doing. So if something does occur, you don't miss it just because you're not capable. So, and I'm paraphrasing what he said. He was much more eloquent than I am in that sense.
Oh, no. I think that's perfect.
But I agree with him. It's just a chance thing sometimes. And it's just like I've written, and I was very successful. I think I added it up one time. I won about $50 million worth of government contracts in Iraq for a company I was working for. I was their security director. And I didn't know, when I started that, I didn't know anything about writing government contracts. I got with some really smart people that knew how to write contracts. A guy named Kevin Kuklo, who worked in Iraq. He's a Marine Corps general officer, and some other people that I'd run into. And I really just picked their brain and took all what I thought was the best parts of what they were saying and applied them, and it worked. And, so it wasn't by chance. I had to do the work, but it wasn't impossible either.
Right. No. And I love that story about the Ford executive from Australia, because I get asked the same. Not that people want to be me or that I'm successful, but people ask, I want to be Bill Gates, right? I want to be this person. I've got 5 kids. They ask me, I want to be this. What do I have to do? And there's a fine line between saying, look, it's all sort of, roll with the dice, and some people get it, some people don't, and to the point of being discouraging, where people are like, well, then, okay, then I'll just, maybe see if it's me or not. And explaining that it requires a whole lot of hard work and determination and persistence and a positive attitude and all those things. I think that now, all of that to say, I think we're lying if we say there's not some bit of luck involved or some bit of circumstance involved. But that what they say, luck favors the prepared, right? Or luck favors the wise. And so I think that just like you said, if you are busting your tail, doing the best you possibly can, and the performance is there, then the circumstance or the timing will align down and put you down a path that you wouldn't trade the world for. But look, go ahead.
Well, I just to add one thing to say, it sounds great, but I mean, I omitted a few things. I didn't leave Delta Force on the best circumstances. I'll be frank with you. I'm not going to get into the details, but I was told by Chuck Briscoe, he said, based on your career to this point, you're going to have to start over and kind of fight your way back to get to where you think you want to be. Said it's not going to be simple. You're going to have to basically start over again. And I think challenges like that, where you have to kind of reinvent yourself or they still are based on integrity and honesty and all those things. But you have a challenge with starting in a new company because, if you're working for Ford all your life and then you have to go work for somebody else, they've got people that have been working at these companies for a long time. They're more entrenched. It's a little different in the Army Reserve or the Army National Guard than I had a big leg up based on my experience, but it still was a transition that I had to kind of reinvent what I was about and kind of reprove myself to a lot of different people. I think I've done that very well. But people need to understand that failure is part of all these things. You're trying to develop a product or do win a contract, like I said, and my hat's off to my wife, because she made a contract that we wouldn't have gotten. She absolutely went in there with, I'll be honest with you, very little corporate experience, and turned this thing around in an hour, I think, 2 hours in a meeting.
Wow.
And that was $500,000 in that 2 hours. So I can't thank her enough, obviously, for that. But
that's amazing.
She's got a lot of great attributes. So I think having somebody in your team that's on board and is competent is very important also. So it's not just about me or what I think I can do as a leader and be able to shake up the corporate ladder and so forth. You got to have people that want to do things, but you have to give them the opportunity to succeed also. So I think failure's part of it, but also the team building stuff is important.
I'm so glad you added those pearls, because that's fantastic. Like I think it's very difficult to learn outside of failure. My personal opinion.
Yeah.
When everything's going well and you're doing, and I got this promotion, everything's going well, things don't sting as bad. They don't sink in as much. But when you look failure right in the face, you do a lot of introspection. How did I get here? You think about what's going on, and those, at least in my life, those have been the times where I have actually gotten the most out of the failures, because I've learned lots of lessons, what not to do, what to do, and it sounds like failure played a huge role in your career as well.
Absolutely. I don't think you can not speak about what we're talking about and bring those things up where the challenges. I'm preaching to the choir to a certain degree here, but if something is simple and it's successful and you did a survey and everything worked great, it's very smooth, everything works perfectly, that's great. It's a lot easier in the sense of you didn't have to think about every angle, but when you failed at something and you're trying to reestablish a position or do something right, it's much more important to get in there and really look at every level. You might have to reinvent some portion of what you're doing in a briefing or something. It's a lot different. So I don't think anybody that's been very successful has not gone through a failure process somewhere.
Amen.
They're probably out there, but everybody's not, well, actually, Elon Musk said, he slept under his desk for 2 years at Tesla. Part of that being to set the example for his people, saying, hey, I'm all in on this, guys. Yep. I'm not just here playing golf and screwing off. We're trying to make something of this company. And I think success has common threads. Not always the same, but common threads.
I agree. And common threads is is a really insightful way to put it. And when you sort of boil it down and get rid of all the fluff, that's what this podcast really is about, is understanding and identifying the common threads of success through people's stories, people like you. And this is all, you're certainly never preaching to the choir, because this is all unbelievable info and all very much appreciated. And I mean that. So I also couldn't agree more with the point that you made about teammates. You really got to have strong teammates. You can't, no one can make the whole company or the whole unit or the whole platoon or battalion shine, by themselves. They got to have amazing teammates with them. Have you ever thought about? You served with some of this country's greatest leaders, with McChrystal and Pete Blaber and Scott Miller. Have you ever thought about common threads amongst those individuals, or are there certain similarities that sort of run the gamut between the best and the greatest leaders that you encountered in the military. Now, that may assume that the best leaders are the ones that get promoted up to general, which
not necessarily, but
okay.
What I would say in reference to that, and I can't speak for any of these guys.
Absolutely.
But what I would say is that when they develop people to work with them, in all my experience with all those people and a bunch of other people that I haven't mentioned at the 06 or even 05 level, that they're always looking for somebody that's, and I was, when I was trying to hire, corporate people to help me as a deputy or whatever I was doing as a CEO, and that have a like-minded personality.
Yeah.
They have to, we have to have common goals. We have to have, humility. You have to have certain traits of those people. And I think all those people that I mentioned, we all have similar traits in the sense that we care about people, we do all these things, and we have a very similar outlook on humanity that transcends some of the things, but it helps you select the right people. Because frankly, if I interview somebody and they're miserable, or they're just negative, and everything is, I have no time for that. As a matter of fact, the people, like I said, I teach shooting right now, and I'm very selective. I interview these people, and it's funny because when they say, well, I'd like to come and shoot at your range and do some basic shooting classes, I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have to sit down and talk about this. And I talk to these people, number one, because I don't want them to be some screwball that's
Sure.
going to go shoot a bunch of people up. But if I don't like them, or I don't have some kind of similarity with these people, I don't really want to work with them. And a simple sense of that is, I think you have to understand the big picture of life. And if you're going to tell me that, everything is, I'll throw it out there. If you're going to sit there and tell me you're an atheist and this and that, and the whole world's negative and everybody's nasty, I don't really have any time for that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, yeah, thanks for chatting with me, and move on. And I think that bringing people in, and it's not really a gender or a racial thing.
Right.
It's just having like-minded people that want to be successful, have a positive outlook on things. Because if they don't, they drag everybody else down.
Agreed.
And I think those people that I mentioned would agree with that. And
well, yeah, I mean, that's extremely insightful, and something that I haven't had brought up a lot on this podcast. But I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. And I think a lot of people don't have the gumption to, or the confidence to admit that, frankly. I mean,
well,
like you said, it's not political. It's not,
right.
It's not political. There's nothing like good, bad, whatever about it, but it's one of those, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, and it's one of those, what makes a match type thing. That is completely. It can't be. It's not. This isn't something that could be seen as not being a good thing. It's whether you could get along with, and are sort of simpatico with this person that you're about to work with. Right. And I think that is. That's really insightful, and maybe what the country or what the world needs to hear more.
Well, I think the examples of, let's say, in the space program, the U.S. space program, if you're old enough to understand that, the things that they were doing in the 60s to put these people on the moon was so far advanced. Just in the, the old movie, The Right Stuff, and all this baloney.
Yeah.
But if you think of America as a big picture thing, and I don't want to debate with people that it's not perfect. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's the most perfect system that's ever existed, and it's the one that exists right now. And if we think we're going to reinvent it into some nonsense that failed in Russia or China or other places, it's never going to work.
Agreed.
Okay. The example that the United States has placed, and I'll tell you, the fact that Delta Force exists is part of that story, that absolute successful story. You know, for me to sit here and tell anybody that it's less than that, we have the best system across the country in justice and all this. And sure, there's been problems. Somebody got arrested that shouldn't have, whatever.
Right.
You know,
I could not agree more. And I get very, very, my blood pressure goes up talking about this because it drives me absolutely
bananas. Well, you're
bananas.
the right guy then, see?
Well, especially when younger people don't appreciate or understand the gift and the blessing that they have been given just by being born in this country. And that
absolutely, my wife says that all the time.
Where
else do you want to be born?
Right. If they had been born anywhere else on this planet, their life would not be. Well, I shouldn't say that. If they had been born anywhere else on this planet, they would not have the number of choices and the freedoms that they have for the rest of their lives to do what they want to do, and that should be celebrated and appreciated and at least understood.
I just got this told to me that the fact that if you're a woman and you're born somewhere else, really it's good luck, because across the world, there's very few places. And bottom line is America treats women better than equal here. It's silly to espouse anything less. But I can tell you, I lived in the Middle East. I lived in Africa. I lived all over the world. And women are treated like property in most places. A quote from one of my Iraqi friends was, "Oh, you got a wife? Yeah, you got to have a wife. You have to have a couch too." They couldn't care less.
Yeah.
It meant nothing to them.
Well, that's unfortunate. To your point, look, it took us a while, right? I mean, with the women's rights and women's suffrage and all that, it took us a while. But what we are certainly as close to this American experiment, at least in my humble opinion, is the best attempt to get it right in the history of humanity thus far. And we are, at least I feel very fortunate to be able to be a part of it and to be a citizen.
No, I would agree. Yeah.
And it would be very difficult to be in several other parts of the world, like in Gaza or in Israel or, frankly, Afghanistan, Iraq, anywhere over there at the moment.
Sure.
Well, so let me ask you, so when you transitioned out, you mentioned that actually you were still in when you ran the airport security program. And you said it was, they commented or someone told you that it was the best.
The director of the National Guard Bureau from DC commented to my boss, who told me about it after. I'm like, well, isn't that nice? What do I get out of that? But no, and we had what he said was they briefed him on what we were doing. And the guy, this general, I don't remember the guy's name, looked at him and he said, "Are you kidding me? You're not actually doing all this, aren't you?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we got this Delta Force guy that's running it for us." So
we were talking about when you ran the airport security program and the head or the who was somebody from DC commented to your boss that it was the best in the world, and he was saying, "Yeah, I got this Delta Force guy that's running it for me." What was it that set you guys apart, and what did you do?
Well, I don't know what all these other programs were. He would know that. But what we did was we selected a bunch of people that we thought were the right guys.
Okay.
We trained, I don't remember the exact numbers, but several hundred people had to qualify with pistols because I made the comment during a staff meeting with the general. They were going to put these guys in helmets and like flak vests and rifles at the airport. And I was like, you know, I go, look, we're not trying to scare the public here. We're just trying to add a layer of security. And there was a young civilian guy in this meeting. I didn't know who he was. And the next day, this general, Jim Kelly, was my boss. He came back in and he was laughing. He goes, yeah, the governor just mandated that we're going to be in berets and pistols for the airport security. And I go, wow, that's what I said in the meeting. He goes, yeah, you see that young guy that was sitting in there was one of his aides.
Ah.
So he liked the idea and briefed his boss, and they made it happen. But the fact is, we had to train everybody to qualify with pistols. We did that over a couple of weeks. And then we kept and I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for my entire life. And we did a personnel control technique class and then kept reinforcing it. And we would travel around the state and train all the different crews at each airport because they were spread out all over the state. The program was set up that way so we could continue to keep the training level up and actually improve it across and it was for about 18 months, I think we did that. But yeah, he was very impressed with what we were doing. And I didn't get anything for it.
Well, you should have. That's unfortunate. I know. I'm sure that there was somebody somewhere that got some award they didn't deserve at the same time, right?
Yeah,
But it's okay. It is all right. But after you got out of the unit, and then that's a great example of a project or what you were working on. What all did you take from your military experience, particularly your experience with the unit, when you transitioned to start doing more civilian type things?
Well, I took some people directly that I had worked with.
Oh, really?
So on some of the contracts that I had run, I used former members in certain circumstances and tried to utilize some of their talents. It was very few. But either way, I still used the selection process of that people that I had worked with on different levels that I was impressed with.
Yeah.
And I would bring them in, whether they were a former unit guy or just an Army guy or whatever. And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked well. We had a pretty good group of people for quite a while over a large period of time.
Well, it goes back to one of your original comments about, what makes the leaders great is that you have a process for identifying and understanding talent, right? And
yep.
So you knew what you were getting with those people and knew what you could deliver.
Right. And I think you got to learn from every experience. And when if I was doing government contracts or I was trying to run a different program, I wasn't always aware of the criteria that was involved, but you have to learn those things.
Yeah.
And it's not like government contracting isn't that simple. If you're trying to do government security contracts, it's different than government logistical contracts. Although I'd worked on both, I still had to do the research on logistics versus security or whatever.
Right.
So, and that came directly from a guy named Paul Zastra, who I worked with in Fort Lewis and in Fort Bragg, and got to know him. And he was a former enlisted guy, but was an officer in the unit. And he said, you got to you have to learn things all the time. He goes, don't just think you know it all. You don't. Go find out. And if you think you know it all, research it anyway, because you're going to find something else out. And he was probably one of the best. I mean, Chuck Briscoe is up there and a couple other guys, but these are guys that made a very big impact on me. And my success is absolutely tied to their leadership.
Well, so just two more questions, Tom, if you're okay. This has been so incredible, and I mean, these are pearls of wisdom that I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of. So again, I can't thank you enough. But so this is, I guess, maybe just to sort of wrap up some of the leadership talk that we've been talking about. If you were talking to a new leader that just took over a division or even a company, and was a young, inexperienced leader that was about to have 100 direct reports and was just looking for some advice for how, are there any to-dos or not to-dos as a great leader? What would do you have any thoughts that you would share?
Well, I'll tell you, in the management sense, I took over a job in Afghanistan. It's a long story, so I was basically a worker guy for a period of time, and they identified the fact that for whatever reason, they never told me what they saw, but they said, we're putting you in charge of this. And it was probably 30, 40 guys involved. And I was like, okay, I know how to do that. So in the assumption of command things, the first thing I did was I looked for redundancy in all the reporting stuff that was going on. So whenever I took over a new job, because what happens with, I'll say it this way, what happens with Army officers, they like to have a lot of information, but sometimes they don't look at the information that closely, and a lot of it's redundant. So you waste a lot of people's times with reports and nonsense that you can streamline if you actually read everything and you make a list and you cross-check your list on everything that they're saying, and you'll find most of the time that information is redundant. And what it does is it wastes your time and it wastes your guys' time. They could be doing something else if they don't have to respond to something that's already been done. So you absolutely have to manage your time and your information as a boss, or if you want to call it CEO. But you have to manage your time. If you get tied up with too much baloney that is irrelevant, and you should be smart enough to see what's relevant. Now, if your boss says it's relevant, it's relevant. But if you can make the argument that he doesn't need to see everything, then do that. But I think that each level, if you can train your management to streamline information and information flow at each level, you'll get more concise reports, and you'll be able to report things better at a board level or at a corporate level, and it saves you time and money. So, and this is just not as a military person or some kind of job, because military guys don't care.
Yeah.
Because they don't make any money. They can make all the stupid reports they want, and they think it matters, and it doesn't. You're still wasting people's time, but it's a different situation than a corporate situation. Yeah. Although I've done it on both sides, in the military side and in the corporate side. So that's that. I don't know if that's too technical, or it's not a broad brush thing of, well, you need to be a leader and, sing songs or something.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Information management's very important.
I love that. And the reason I think that's a really great piece of advice is because it gives a quick win. Not only is it going to help, save time and money, but it also gives your team a quick win, right? If you're cutting things and they don't have to do, there's things that like, oh, thank God, finally somebody recognizes that we had to do this, 3 times, and now I don't have to waste my time doing this crap. So this guy gets it, or this gal gets it. So yeah, I think I could see how that would be really, really impactful. All right. So before I get to the very last question, which I ask everybody, I made a quick note here. Having been in the Middle East or spent and know as much as you do about that region, and Do you care to sort of comment at all on what's going on over there with whether it's Israel, Hamas,
sure.
or I'm curious.
No problem.
Okay.
Everybody's not going to agree with my comment, but sure.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, no.
That's actually a good thing because then we get to, debate about it. But yeah, not us, but the
well, that's
audience.
the thing is there should be a debate,
Yes.
When I was listening to somebody's podcast, I'm not sure who it was, and the Palestinians are all saying from the river to the sea, it sounds nice, but that they don't understand is that's the elimination of the state of Israel. And whether they like it or not, the state of Israel exists. So, and I heard a lot of different podcasts. This is an example of the two-state solution being a failure because they gave Gaza to them, and I know they blockaded it, but there were still people working in Israel. There was all kinds of things going on. The Israelis did what they could. Are they occupying parts of the West Bank when they probably shouldn't be? Maybe. But the fact is, they didn't go in and slaughter anybody. The Hamas people here are the same as the Taliban. They're the same as the groups in Iraq and Syria. These are all the same people.
Yeah.
And the only thing they understand is what's going on right now. And they will. Matter of fact, if you want to look at it historically, Genghis Khan was coming into the Middle East and they all panicked and didn't know what to do and basically threw their hands up and gave up because they understood what the consequences were. And I think we're going to see that happen here. I don't know what the end of Gaza is going to look like, but it's not going to look anything like it did. And if they think the Israelis aren't capable of fighting a 2 or 3 front war, they're sadly mistaken. And the U.S. is backing them up, and we should be.
So, do you think that Iran? Well, let's see how I can ask this. What do you think Iran?
I know that Iran is involved. The problem here.
Do you think that? Do you think they will be involved? Not behind the scenes, but admittedly by the time this is all over, militarily. My answer to that is I really don't care because I know they're involved and we know they're involved. And I think the aftermath of this, and I've said this on another guy's radio show, the aftermath of this is they're going to lose all of their nuclear capability. And the Israelis are going to make sure of that. And the U.S. isn't going to stop it if we don't directly help them do it. So the Iranians are just part of the cabal of bad guys, but they make a lot of money, and unfortunately we're helping that out. But I think in the end, there's going to be a shift of power in the Middle East. Okay.
Yeah. And it's unprecedented. The Saudis shot down 3 missiles out of Yemen that were heading for Israel. The Saudi air defense shot it down.
Really?
So, yeah. So that's a big deal. That's unprecedented.
Sure is. Coming out of Yemen?
I think if people, they were coming out of the Houthi side of Yemen, which the Saudis are fighting those guys too. But the fact is, I think we're going to see a shift in power, surely in the Hamas side of it. So that's just my opinion.
All right. So I asked this final question to all my guests, and look, God forbid that anything like this would ever happen to anybody, but I asked the question anyway. If like I said, God forbid a fire or something were happening at your house or your office, and you had just one moment to run in and grab one thing before the fire consumed everything, what would you grab?
The first thing I would go is I would rescue my wife, who on the way out would rescue our dog.
I love it. That's a great answer.
Thank you, Brandon. It was great. I appreciate it.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.